Dr. MacNamara, I want to, again, as part of introducing you, mention your book, Rest, Play, Grow. I love your subtitle, Making Sense of Preschoolers or Anyone Who Acts Like One. I identify with being one of those parents who actually came into parenting with a lot of preschool behavior, unfortunately made for a rough start with parenting. Really want to acknowledge you as the person who's doing, one of the people who's doing so much to popularize and continue to expand on the popularity of Dr. Gordon Neufield's work. Let's dive right in and talk about our topic today, which is discipline that builds connection, understanding aggression and frustration, including sibling conflict. So let's dive in a little bit. Why is aggression on the rise, and why is it such a massive issue for parents today?
Well, I think that the challenge with aggression is that, of course, it ends up in attacking behavior on somebody and violates somebody, whether it's throwing things, verbal types of comments. It's uncivilized and egregious, and in different contexts, it can pose different problems, whether it's a school environment versus it's a home environment. And I think the challenge is that we don't really understand that nature had its intention here in terms of development, so that there would be a period through which we should naturally grow, where we could temper our strong emotions. And that seems to be eclipsed in a lot of our understanding of these huge emotions that can get the better of us. And so, to take a step back, we need to say, well, what did nature intend here? Well, between the ages of 5 to 7, brain development should occur to the degree that you start to see some tempering in a child's behavior. This is the birthplace of impulse control, being able to think twice, feeling inner dissonance and conflict. So one part of you wants to hit or say something, but the other side, you can feel the tension between two emotions or two thoughts. If I do this, this will happen. This is where consequences in their life, they start to understand the consequences of their behavior better, or should I say they're able to follow through and control their actions. Preschoolers know a lot of what they should do, but they can't live it out loud because they don't have impulse control. It's this beautiful shift between the ages of 5 to 7 where a child should be more tempered and should show signs of emotional control. So I think what happens is that when we get to aggression, it's the place where we are not tempered, where we don't have self-control. And so we have to ask through development, has that occurred for a child? And then if it has, then what's driving the frustration that's underneath the aggression?
Okay, so we'll get into that in a moment and some of the ways that we can figure out what's driving our child's frustration. And can you make some comments about why, as a whole, you already touched on the fact that there's this phase of our life, which is the preschool phase, where we are supposed to be starting to learn those skills. So why do you think those skills are being not learned as well as they used to be? There's definitely a gap, a challenge that we're getting more and more issues with kids being aggressive. Or would you agree with that? Does it just feel that way?
Well, I think our children, if we had to look at a large trend, I think there are signs that our children are emotionally more stirred up, whether that's alarm or frustration. We're having some more behavior and learning challenges. And certainly if we follow the rates of diagnosis in our children, we see that we're not, we're on a steady incline. So the question really is why do our children seem to be so stirred up with so much emotion? And to understand that, you have to get back to, again, what takes care of children's emotions, what keeps our emotions in balance and in check. We don't necessarily learn skills to become under more self-control, have more self-control. This is something that the brain naturally will develop and evolve to be able to handle the emotions with an environment that's conducive to it. So we have to say, well, why are children so stirred up? Why is it they seem to be not developing in ways that we would hope to see if all was going well? And there's many things then that we have to say, well, what is frustrating our kids? What is stirring them up? What are their biggest needs that are not being met? And what we see today is that you know, from the nuclear family that is under incredible stress today,
Mm.
without the support of extended family or attachment villages that sort of support and bolster the functioning of the family, we see that the nuclear family is taking an incredible is under incredible pressure. Parents are very stressed, and as a result, the relational aspects of raising children are being very much challenged. And so children are facing far too much separation in many areas of their life from the adults that are responsible for them. And I think that this is one of the biggest sources of our emotional duress and stress, and all of the emotions from frustration to, you know, when it turns foul and becomes aggression, to, you know, anxiety issues, attention problems, learning and behavioral problems. When you start to trace the roots of this, we see that what is meant to take care of children are the relationships with their adults. And we see adults are incredibly stressed today. So that's how I would put it together.
I love that, because I think that when we understand, I know what's so hopeful and so important about this work that you are popularizing is that, and your work is, the fact of the matter is, it's not us being separate from our children necessarily, but it's knowing how to work with separation so that our children can still feel close to us. And that's so important. I know you also talk a lot in your book, Rest, Play, Grow, about the fact that we're getting so outcome focused as well, and that's impacting our children's kind of natural growing into these skills that they should be naturally growing into. Do you want to speak a little bit about that as well, please?
Well, you know, it's interesting. The title rest, people have told me, you know, oh, does that mean sleep, or what does that mean? And they've been sort of intrigued by that saying, or by that word. And when we really look into what it means to be at rest, I'm talking in terms of the emotional and relational connections in one's life. And so this is what needs to function most of all for children. And so this is where we need to work at in terms of creating the conditions so that they can grow. I've lost my train of thought in your question there. So coming back to relationships, like, this is where we really need to focus a lot of our energy so that maturity can take the lead, and they basically render us non-essential anymore. You know, the idea is to launch a teenager into the world, a young adult into the world, so they know how to handle themselves. Frustration and aggression and discipline issues aren't something we should be working on with a young adult. In fact, you should see this much less so. So what is it that we need to do to bring our children to rest in our relationships so that nature can grow them psychologically? Because psychological growth isn't a foregone conclusion. We don't all grow up. We get bigger bodies, but we don't psychologically become more mature.
Absolutely. And many of us as parents find ourselves suddenly faced with our own issues, right? That I know I was just horrified to discover I had aggression in me that I didn't realize, and I didn't have, you know, the pathway to deal with my own frustration and those different things. And we may touch on that too, because I know you talk about how parenting is meant to grow us up. To go back though, part of what I love and why we're talking about this right away is, it doesn't matter if your kids are older than preschool or not. The fact of the matter is, what we're talking about right now is the antecedents to aggression and frustration, and getting at the core and getting at the roots of what's going on. Do you want to speak a little bit? Well, we're speaking, you know, you talked about how we don't necessarily grow up, but talk a little bit about that process. About, you know, I know you say it's spontaneous but not inevitable. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's fascinating, because when you look at the body, we take for granted that arms and legs know how to grow, and hair and, you know, height. We always sit back and say, oh, I wonder how tall this child will be. I wonder when their body will decide to, you know, they'll lose their teeth. And we sit back and sort of celebrate how we physically grow. And we don't try to force this, you know. We're not trying to stretch their arms and legs and pull their hair so it grows. And yet when it comes to psychological development and maturity, this idea that we could be social beings who are capable to be with others in a responsible way, and to be civilized and considerate and compassionate, that we're able to be be adaptive and be resilient and resourceful and face adversity, and to find our tears in the face of all that does not work. This is part of our developmental blueprint as well as becoming a separate being, having your own ideas, being able to set your own goals and chart a course forward. If we look at psychological development, there is a whole blueprint there developmentally that is meant to be unlocked. Now, if you take the gardener model, what does every gardener know? It's what goes into the roots. It's how we nourish the seed, so
Yes.
that nature can have its way. There is a blueprint here for development. What is it that we must do? What must we work at to provide the conditions that are essential for growth and development? And we know there's two things. If you had to sum it up and distill it to the essence, as Gordon Newfield does, is there's two things. Children need right relationships and soft hearts. What does that mean? Right relationships, they need to be attached in a dependent way with the adults who are responsible for them. That could be a teacher, a grandparent, aunt, uncle, parents, whoever it is that's standing in for a child and assuming responsibility to raise that child, and to point them in the right direction, especially when immaturity gets the better of them, and to hold on to them, and not let that relationship be divided from them, or to let other things compete with it or take the place of it. It's okay that they have friends. This isn't the issue. The issue is that nothing must compete with that being the most nurturing relationships for a child and a place of rest. And the second thing, which makes perfect sense, is that, of course, if you understand that relationships where adults take the lead are essential, well, then what's the biggest thing that they must take the lead on? Well, it's our emotional development. I mean, emotional development is as sophisticated as cognitive development, and we're really on the threshold of understanding what that means. And it's very exciting time to be doing this work, to see the research sort of blossom and uncover what humanists and existentialists and developmentalists have always argued, that our emotions are really the seat of our development. And it's a lifelong endeavor to have a relationship with our emotions so that we can be civilized, so that we can feel conflict and dissonance in the face of our emotions, so we don't react out of them, but we can find our way through them. And so soft hearts is really the goal of parenting, which is to keep our children moving forward emotionally in their development. And so soft hearts, right relationships, that's what makes our children grow. That's what makes them robust, resilient, resourceful, social, separate, adaptive beings. That's nature's blueprint.
So in terms of then making sure that those two conditions exist for helping your child naturally and spontaneously mature, which then helps them temper their feelings and deal with their own aggressive impulses. I think the first part, the keeping the relationship close, I think is something that parents have a fairly good idea in this kind of conscious, positive parenting space. The one that I think that I'd like to go further into is the soft hearts, because I think that that's something, especially, and I know everyone's careful, or lots of people are careful in this space to distinguish that we're not speaking, just because you're speaking conscious parenting, it's not permissive parenting. But what does soft hearts have to do with, limits and things like that? Like, how do you protect your child's soft hearts while having limits?
Yeah. Well, this is, I think, the crux of it, is that permissive parenting is very much assumed to have no limits, and that somehow we can't set limits without preserving relationship. I think that's really the crux of it, is that many people think if I'm saying no, my child's going to be upset, thereby is my relationship adversely affected. And the answer is no. We can be generous and we can be caring and take care of their hearts in many different ways. Sometimes it's when we present them with futilities in life, which are the no's, no to technology, no to sleepovers, or no to, a cookie. Depends how old your child is. When we give our no's, we can be generous in terms of allowing them to feel the frustration that comes with our no's. And the generosity and the invitation for children to feel what they're feeling doesn't mean they get to act. We're not saying the behavior is open-ended, like kick,
Mm.
scream, do whatever you want. What we're saying is that, yes, you have a right to your frustration. This would frustrate you. I'm going to say no. We'll get through this. The invitation for relationship is not withdrawn based on conduct or performance, but that does not mean we don't set limits. It doesn't mean we don't have expectations. Of course we have all those things, but how are we going to hold on to a relationship when there is an impasse between us, when we must act from that place of responsibility to say no, to set limits? How do we take the lead in the relationship to hold on to it with a child? How do we steer forward with that? Part of it is giving them an invitation to have their feelings about it. It doesn't mean it changes our mind, but we find a way to hold on. And that, part of this is a dance that I can't, it's not a prescription. Part of it is very individual to each parents, and is individual to each child. Every child can have a very different temperament, with some more sensitive kids being very quick to react to these, impasses that can come up between us. And so we have to dance with who we have, and we have to use our intuition and our own emotions. But what I've found is that if we understand that our job is to stay focused on the relationship and to ensure that their hearts are healthy, that we're going to find a way through these challenging times with our kids. I can give you some suggestions and ideas, but I truly believe that parents, if they yearn in that direction, they will find their way through.
And if parents, and that's where the whole gardening analogy, let's go into the gardening versus sculpting, because I think the challenge is that parents don't trust nature in this department, right? And rightfully so, because we're looking around and saying, flip, things are not going well. And so it provokes anxiety in us and gets us starting to hover. But like your physical example, we don't tug on hair, limbs, etc., trying to get them to grow, but we are tugging on the fruits of maturation, the results that should be there, we know should be there at some point. And that impatience is its own challenge. So, yeah.
Well, I think that if you go through, the last 100, 200 years, or even just in our own conceivable, duration of life, what you see is that we very much live under a behavioral cognitive type of model, where we try to shape things with reinforcement, with punishment, with threats or bribes, rewards, because we believe that if we dangle the carrot or the reward, that somehow we're going to imprint into this child the way they should be, or into an adult. But that whole paradigm, which is, stemming from John Locke onwards for the last 250 years, that has come under scrutiny and challenge because of our new science. All of the leading neuroscientists say, no, we don't think ourselves into maturity. We feel and we grow. And we know that we are far more emotional as beings, and we have instincts that come pre-wired, as well as emotions that come pre-wired in us. The instinct and the emotion to care is hardwired in. Frustration is hardwired in. Alarm is hardwired in. You don't teach a child to be afraid. It's what comes with it. Us. We would be concerned if they weren't afraid. The same with frustration. Frustration is actually a very important emotion. It's as important as the capacity to care.
Right.
So what has happened is that we're in the midst of a cultural, scientific shift that understands that our old assumptions around human development, finally, we now have the research to say, we need to rethink these things. And so I think what's happening is for some time now, for maybe the last 10, 20 years, the attachment developmental model is certainly increasing to the fore. You can't ignore the science anymore. It's unequivocal that human relationships are essential for development. But now we're trying to figure out what that means. And so there's this disjuncture between us, people who want to shape behavior and give the trinkets and the rewards, but that's only surface level, and it ignores what's underneath, the emotions and the instincts that drive behavior. And if you don't help your child have an understanding of this internal world that will drive them we have to bring it into consciousness. We have to have a relationship with it. We need to be able to say the words, I'm really frustrated right now. Part of me wants to do this. Part of me wants to do this. I know I have to pause. I know I have to think about it. That's where we want to get our kids to, so they understand their emotions. They put their hands on the steering wheel and say, how am I going to steer into this emotional stirrings inside of me? That's what maturity looks like. And that's why parenting is another beautiful opportunity to grow. Nature wasn't mistaken here. Our best growth often is assuming responsibility for a child, because they make you have to grow again emotionally. You can't do parenting well without some growth, because you've got a whole other layer of frustration and consideration and impulses that will be drawn out of you when you're dealing with immaturity. I mean, there's no other force in the world like an immature child that is going to test your maturity, right? So
Absolutely.
It's a wonderful time for us to grow. So that's a very long answer to your question, but we're really in the middle of a behavioral cognitive approach, really shifting midstream to support our new science and what we understand about human development. So people are going to feel like, okay, I'm so mixed up. Do I not reward? Do I not praise? What am I supposed to do in absence of this? So I get that.
And there's a lot, like our school systems, there's a lot of systems out there that are really heavily on that reward type. And I wanted to highlight too that so many of our experts, including Dr. Neufeld's been on before, Dr. Siegel, Dr. Laura Markham, etc., are all attachment science based, and that's a whole different thing, because that's separate from attachment parenting, which can be an offshoot, but not necessarily the same thing. The gardening analogy, what I think is so important is, like you said, you're looking at the roots and looking at making the conditions present. And I know at first, and good heavens, was I one of those that, I had an aggressive toddler and I wanted answers.
And I want non-aggressive toddler?
No, an aggressive. Oh yeah, you're saying, is there such a thing? Yeah.
No such thing.
Love that, actually.
We're all prone to react.
And I think that's one of the things that we need to highlight too, is that some of the people listening have a child who's prior to that 5 to 7, when they start getting their prefrontal cortex coming on board, which can be called that mixing bowl, where you can mix those feelings, right? But some people have 12-year-olds who really, through no fault of the parents, the child has not really properly come into their own in terms of their ability to deal with their frustration. Do you want to speak briefly on how you work with that type of scenario?
Yeah. Well, we use the concept of a child getting stuck. Development can get stuck. It's not a foregone conclusion that we all grow up emotionally. The beautiful thing is that when you can remove the impediments that are in the way of this development, then you can restart or get development moving in the right direction again. So if a child is 12, doesn't, is quick to react, doesn't seem to have impulse control, then we would start to say, well, why is this absent in a child? Do they have, they don't show signs of mixed feelings? Do they have their tears? Do they have their caring? Because caring, if you're talking about mixed emotions, what is the antidote to frustration that prevents us from actually acting out? If you really think about yourself as a parent, it's not the absence of frustration that tempers you. It's finding the antidote in the face of frustration, and the antidote is deep caring. You care enough not to lash out. You care enough about that person or the consequences, and that holds you steady in terms of not lashing out. It doesn't mean you are without frustration. It just means that your caring is bigger and has tempered it. Sometimes for some kids, and again, every story you have to look at and all the conditions you have to look at with kids. But if I had a 12-year-old who didn't have weren't tempered in their frustration, I'd say, why so much frustration in their life? Where's all the separation? Does this child have their tears? Who are their adults? How can we, get this heart softened if it needs softening? How can we increase vulnerability? But I would work through the relationships that work for the child, that to give them a sense of rest, to open up this capacity to care. The great thing is about development is that, you can kickstart it no matter what age.
Yes.
if you provide the conditions. Some things are better done, obviously, earlier, but there's no, it's never too late. And as adults, our tears can get stuck too. We can become
Absolutely.
incredibly frustrated. How do you explain burnout? Burnout is this place of incredible duress and stress. And so, this is not something that just happens with our children, but with our own emotional systems. We also need to take care of those as well.
Yes. Yeah. And it is so wild how really those two key things that you highlighted, they're important for maturation, that right relationships and that having a soft heart, that really we can nurture that for ourselves too, by getting that deep connection that we need in our life with at least one caring adult. I love that about the fact that our children need one caring adult. So if we're a single mom, we need support for us, but it's okay that we're a single mom and we don't have to feel like we can't be a good parent as a result.
Yeah, I think it's about supporting that single parent. What does that single parent need? Well, they need to be freed from, the responsibilities of managing a house and finances and things like that. That would be the ideal, is to support that parent in being a parent to their child. The problem is that, our in developed countries, our parents are oftentimes being taken away from their kids because of our stress in everyday life, and we are not set up to deliver parents to their children. We just don't. We struggle to do this. There are huge impediments here that we have to face, and for single parents, there are enormous ones. But all the research shows that when you build a village, when you build a community, when the community supports that parent and supports that family, you see that those children, their growth and their potential can absolutely be realized.
Which is huge. I'd love to dive more into that, but I love that you touched on that. That attachment village is absolutely critical. So let's circle back for a second too. So for the parent who's got the preschooler who's frustrated and being aggressive, because of course they're frustrated, they've got lots, but they don't have the ability yet to mix their feelings. So you talked about the right relationships and soft hearts. Do you want to give an example? Let's go ahead, actually even dive into how that might look in a sibling conflict type of situation where you're still working the right relationships and working on the soft hearts.
Well, I'll give one for my kids when they were younger, because it's always easiest to pull something that's real. So my kids were, well, and of course, when you leave two preschoolers alone, I mean, they're not tempered, they're unpredictable. My favorite quote Gordon Neufeld, one of them is, it's a good thing that preschoolers have small bodies and poor aim, because we'd be in big trouble, right?
Yeah.
Because there is no impulse control in a child generally under the age of 4. You start to see maybe some little things clicking 4.5 if development's going well. But so they're untempered. Whatever emotion they're feeling, it can come out. So I remember my children, one of them had a balloon. And, I was doing something and they were together, 5-10 minutes together. I think there were 4 and 2.5. And I hear yelling, the sign that they're in trouble. So I go in there and my response is, obviously you're upset. What's happened here? And one of them screaming, she broke my balloon. The other one screaming, she yelled at me. And so they're in this midst. So I said, hold on, I'm here. You got to take the lead. And part of what comes with that is, not playing judge and jury. They're both frustrated. The thing to focus on here is the emotions in each child and your relationship. And you've got to take the lead. This is chaos. You can't leave them on their own to figure this out.
Yes.
The stronger one's going to win or whatever. So I say, okay, well, I said something like, I understand you're upset your balloon broke. You loved your balloon. I know it was an accident. I give her the benefit of the doubt. The other child, I know it was an accident. And you didn't like it when you got yelled at. You're upset that you got yelled at. This isn't working. I'm here to help you. So I said, does anyone have any sorries? I know this was just an accident. And my older one actually was soft enough at the point. And she said, yes, I'm sorry I broke your balloon. And it was a deep sorry. And the way I ask is, do you have any sorries? Because
I like that.
Yeah. And so I asked my little one, who was 2.5. I said, do you have any sorries for yelling at your sister? Because sisters aren't yelling at. I know you got upset. And she says, no, I don't. I don't have any. My big one goes, that's not fair. And I said, yes, I know, but your sister doesn't have any sorry. She'll have some later. I have to get ready for work. So this is what we're going to do. I'm going to help you get something ready, and I'll talk to you later about this. Right. And so I separated them, not in a punitive way, but helped them get ready doing something. And about 5 minutes later, my little one, who's 2.5, came back in, and she said to me, I gave my sister a hug and a peppermint. And I said, well, your sorries must have come back. And she said, just one, that's it, that's all. See, so the beautiful thing about a preschooler is, you know, because they only feel one emotion at a time, they can actually flip through frustration back to caring pretty quickly. And so part of this is patience. Now, what was a message to her long term? You know, that, caring is obviously what we need to do in the face of our frustration. We need to make amends when we have blown it and our frustration has got bigger than our caring. That I will help them lead through the situation, that I am in charge. I do take charge. I do understand their emotions. I do understand their frustration. But I did also point them in a civilized direction, which I'll continue to do, until they're able to handle this on their own. So that's a very easy or quick example. But, you know, the key things here is you want to come alongside their emotions. You need to take the lead. You don't want to play judge and jury. You've got to hold on to both relationships with each child. You don't have to deal with everything in the moment. Don't move the head so fast. Keep it to the heart. Take the lead. Be generous. Give children the benefit of the doubt. You can come back around and say, and I often did with my kids, is call me when you're in trouble. That's what mummies are for. And I'll take care of it. So there's lots of ways, but I mean, as I look back now, and I mean, they're just so immature. It's just immaturity. It's not intention. They're not, they're just a product of their age.
I see though so often we get stuck with the vision that our 4-year-old who's hitting is going to be a juvenile delinquent, that we contribute to their stuckness because of that energy that we bring. Because I envision myself when my kids were young, before I started learning this from Neufeld, I was like a bulldozer, that I came in and I brought my own aggressive energy to the situation. So,
well, I think we're very reactive. We want it to stop, and we think if we can get it to stop right away, that's maturity. No, it's not. You've usually used your emotions and your alarm to press down on their frustration, but it doesn't mean that this has actually made them more mature. That's the big false assumption we have. I mean, in reality, if you came in and you gave them a timeout or yelled, this has to stop, all you're doing is changing their frustration into alarm. And so alarm sits on top of all of the other emotions and makes it disappear. But they'll move on and out of there, and they might kick the cat or the dog, or somebody else will get it, and the frustration is still underneath the surface. The goal is to always bring them back into emotional balance. They may have to have some tears. They may have to express some frustration. They may have to find some different words. They may have to come to realize that some things are futile. Balloons do pop, it's one of the sad things of life when you're a 2-year-old to discover that balloons aren't forever. So, we've got under the age of 5, this is so much of our work. There is so much frustration. There's so much futility that they can't change. They want things that happen. They don't come programmed. Knowing balloons burst, they can't have more than one cookie. And so a lot of what we really need to do is to be patient. Most parents I do find, or a lot of parents I do find, do think that if their child is, acting a certain way at 3, that this is their destiny as a 13-year-old. No. If nature has its way, and 5 to 7, and that beautiful shift starts to unlock, and cognitive and emotional integration unfold, brain development arises, everybody says, when they go to kindergarten, oh, look at what they're learning at school. It's not kindergarten that's the answer. That's the time when development has actually occurred, and they're ready for kindergarten. That was always the benchmark for when you start school, because you are tempered.
Yes. I do hope everyone takes from this, like, just a deep breath and relax and realize that if you've got a 10-year-old who's stuck, provide the right conditions and your child will move through that stuckness. And the same if you are, I was the 30-year-old who was stuck, right? If you're the 30-year-old who's stuck, same thing. You will move through that. You will mature. I cannot believe the patience I have now. And I entered parenting. I actually wish that North America, the world would be different if people understood how parenting is meant to improve us. And so all these parents out there, potential parents who are saying, I'm not up to having kids, I couldn't do it. They don't realize that the manual comes with that relationship.
Yes.
With our child. It's in that relationship. So can you speak a little bit too, because I know the number one source of frustration that drives aggression is that inability to feel that attachment, feel that close connection with us. Do you want to speak to that a little bit too?
Well, there are so many things that can drive frustration. Frustration is the emotion of changing something that doesn't work for you. And if you can't change it, then we must find our tears around it. And so the biggest source of frustration for a child, the number one frustration, would be not having their relationships in the way that they want it. And it doesn't mean we need to give it on their terms. In fact, you don't want to just follow a child and them commanding you how they need attention or whatever, because your child's in charge and not you. You want to be able to be generous enough and to take the lead in terms of inviting your child into a relationship. But the biggest source of frustration for a child is not feeling closeness where they want to. Now, sometimes we can provide that and sometimes we can't. Like, I think about one family I had where the father was at home for 2 weeks on vacation and then he went back to work. And the mom was still on vacation for a little bit and she was taking care of him. He threw an incredible temper tantrum. I told his dad, he's 3.5, he wanted to poke his eyes out and chop him up and all the rest of it. And the parents were just aghast. How could this be so? But when you understand the source of frustration for this little boy, he had 2 weeks with a daddy that he loved. Daddy presented the futility of, I have to go to work, which is reality. But this little boy at 3.5, he needed to have his tears about the daddy he couldn't have in the way he wanted him. Daddy was going to come home. Daddy was going to do Lego with him. He wanted daddy now. We get that, but it's not going to be the way it is. And so what he needed to do is to have a substitute or somebody he was close to who can invite the tears, which are the only answer to frustration when you can't get what you want. Is to feel the sadness, it's to feel the disappointment, to have your words for it, to understand why this is difficult. We can survive. Tears are not the hurt. Tears are part of the healing. And so if he couldn't have daddy how he wanted, he needed to have his tears with someone who understood that sadness. It's okay to be frustrated, but sometimes you need to understand that frustration will not change something. It will need to change you. But young kids need people who can help them with that. This isn't going to happen. You're going to be upset. Yes. Daddy will see you later. But what happens, and this is such a critical point, is that when children's frustration turns foul, it becomes aggression.
Yes.
And that aggression can come out of them in many different ways. For the 3-year-old, it can be oftentimes physical attack. By the time they're 3.5, 4, you can start to see verbal attack. I hate you, whatever. That's good, actually. You want it to start to come out through words. And then by 5 to 7, you hope to see some tempering. My kids would say, I half like you right now, or I sort of want you to be my mom, or maybe I'll invite you to my birthday party. And you start to see this kind of tempering where they are actually holding things back. And so that's kind of the trajectory of development. But, when children are, especially under the age of 6, are aggressive, we tend to focus on the attack and to cut it out. And we lose our capacity to teach children and to help them understand the frustration that is actually driving the attack, and to either bring them to tears or to bring them to their words about what isn't working, or sometimes to change what isn't working. And so we get very lost in the aggressive act. We tend to make it worse. We add more frustration to a child, which then increases the temper tantrum. We focus on logic, talking through, this doesn't make sense, when this is an emotion that's driving him. So we oftentimes get very stuck. But if you can focus on the fact that it is frustration, You name it as frustration. You're frustrated. This isn't working for you. I use this with my husband. I use this with my friends. I use this with myself. You're frustrated. What isn't working? What do you want to change? And then it helps me bring into awareness the emotions that I'm struggling with so that I can find my way through instead of just reacting out of it. And so we've got an emotional marathon here with our kids. But if you've got a 2-year-old, teach them the word frustration. Let them know this is what it is. Yeah, if they're attacking, come back to frustration. No, I can't let you hit your sisters. Sisters aren't for hitting. You're frustrated. This isn't working.
Yeah.
And just stay on the emotion so that they can understand this force inside of them. We need our frustration. We need to change things sometimes that are not working, but we need to do it in a civilized way. Yes. And if, we've got to figure out how to do this dance with our young kids when they have no capacity for civilized response. It just comes flying out of them. And it can be unpredictable.
We need to all channel our inner developmental psychologists so we can start channeling you, because in that moment, I just loved it when you said, that your child's old enough to verbally be aggressive. That's great, right? And that's not the typical response, right? As parents, but the I hate yous and all those different things that's just the attack, and that's a symptom of what's going on for your child, right?
I had a dad once who told me that, he said, Deb, I've been doing this. When my child's frustrated, I say, you're really frustrated. He was hitting his dad. He says, I know you're frustrated. I understand you're frustrated. Use your words. Use your words. Yeah. So his 4.5-year-old looked at him and said, I'm going to pee on you, Daddy. My father's like, not those words. I'm like, but that's so much better. I mean, not that you teach your child that, but your child has now channeled it into words. Once they get, they're not hitting anymore. They're not destroying stuff. They're using their words to be the force of their emotional world. That is maturity. But don't expect perfection. It's like you get a little glimpse. Oh, they've got words. Now they've got to have the right words. Now they've got to say it in, the right, mature, civilized way. My goodness, this takes time. Slow down.
Yes.
Hard when you're in the middle of it. But yes, we need to slow it down. They need space. They need time. Man, their development and what is going on inside of them is nothing short of a miracle. It's incredible, the growth, but they need some time.
Yeah. We need, the fun thing is it's really us being critical of ourselves too that often drives that desire to change. So we can benefit so much from resting ourselves and trusting. I want to quickly follow up. Joanna has asked, what if the sibling has a sorry, but the other child won't accept it? I think I know what your answer is going to be, but it says, so the one that said sorry is upset and says there's no point in saying sorry if the other one won't accept it.
Well, but we say sorry for our own self and our own caring. When someone else is ready and their hearts are soft, they'll receive the care, the apology. It doesn't mean we feel sorry. We've got to remember that this is about emotional individuation and being aware of your own emotions. Because you have given your caring, just because someone doesn't accept it doesn't change the caring in you.
Yeah.
Happened. Your sister isn't ready to receive it right now. She's very frustrated. That's where she's at emotionally. It doesn't change the gift that you gave and the caring inside of you, but she's not ready to hear it. Perhaps later she'll feel it and understand it. Take the lead. But, this idea that we all have to get along and feel the same things, I often have this conversation with my kids and teenagers. Your friend has a right to be frustrated about that. You don't have to join her. You can give her space to feel that. It doesn't have to affect your feelings. You get to have those for yourself. The beautiful thing about our emotional worlds is you'll find no two are the same. Our fingerprints in our emotional world, they're like fingerprints, our emotional world. What might make someone else react or feel stirred up doesn't make someone else so affected. Temper tantrums for me don't particularly stir me up, but other things might. And for other parents, it might. So your emotional world is really about what stirs you up and taking responsibility for it. I think the biggest message to our kids is that these are your emotions. This is how you understand yourself, because that's what childhood is really about, is especially in the first 6 years, is understanding who you are. Then you're ready to be social. Then you're ready to start to understand that other people are different from you. And then how do I dance with that difference?
I love that you just mentioned that about, then you're ready to be like an individual. And I think it's one of the many things I know from personal experience that I wanted answers, and people, like, you're stressed, right? Parents
Mm-hmm.
listening, you are stressed. I get it. Especially if you've come to this because it's on aggression and frustration. Chances are your frustration is just spilling over.
Absolutely.
But when we stay focused on the fruits and the results, instead of going at really, why is my kid so frustrated? And are there ways I can hold my kid, keep my child's feeling of being close to me, for them, or can I bring them to their tears, whatever. Then you end up with an individual who you're not at 16 hovering over their homework and worrying about them having no drive and all those different things that I see parents struggling with. Let's talk about one more quick thing about the sibling situation, because I know that you also talk about setting your kids up in the right relationship to each other and doing some matchmaking between them. Do you want to mention a little bit about that as well, and how that helps sibling conflicts?
Well, when we realize that relationships between kids, and especially siblings, are also attachments. You have attachment to your dog, to your grandparent, but also to your sibling. And so how do we facilitate those relationships? Well, do they have, are they, the ways that one of the ways that we attach to other people is feeling the same, and feeling a sense of belonging to those people. And when you're in a family, there should be a natural sense of belonging and being the same as. So matchmaking a child to their sibling can be helpful, putting them in a hierarchical order, big sister, little sister, and so on, and facilitating caretaking from that hierarchy is really important to drawing out caring. Because if you see yourself as equal to somebody, kids will jockey for position. If we treat our kids all the same, they have to figure out the hierarchy and the nature of their relationships. But when you make it clear, the hierarchy in terms of who's oldest to youngest, it actually does draw out beautiful caretaking. So very simply, if I was pulling my kids in the wagon, I would give my eldest a little bowl of cereal or whatever it was, a snack, and she would feed her sister as we're pulling them in the wagon. They might wear a similar, pajamas. I remember my mother, I had 4 siblings. My mom would say, I, as the eldest, got to stay up 15 minutes later. Now that made a big difference. And then I saw myself as being the eldest, and then it drew out caring to take care of my younger sisters. So what happens today in siblings is that sibling relationships is, I think we focus on when they're fighting, but we can get ahead of issues and build their attachments so that natural caring will be drawn out. And again, putting them in a hierarchical order, the eldest to all the way down to the youngest. If you're the youngest, if there's a youngest in the house, make sure, and there's a lot of siblings, make sure you get a pet or something they can be the boss of or take care of. So there's something underneath them. Mm-hmm. But to arrange them in ways that are appropriate to their age and draw out natural caretaking. It's beautiful. It's simple. Your kids can be fighting and you say, okay, you're in charge, I'm leaving the house. And you'll see the eldest will stand up, the fighting will stop, and the caretaking can begin. Why? Because you've ordered them as nature is intending to order us in relationships. One takes the lead, one rests in the care.
Yeah. And, for everyone, you have to have some patience too, that if your kids have quite a pattern of fighting, it might not work the first time. But the fact of the matter is that absolutely nurture that relationship, nurture that hierarchy. It's super powerful.
And I would also say that that's it. My answer is is based on development unfolding well for a child.
Yes.
If a child is under a lot of separation, has a lot of stress in their life, if there's a lot of conflict in their world, and siblings tend to be the number one source that a lot of or other peers tend to be the number one source where frustration can be displaced. Yes. Frustration doesn't always come out where it's created. And so it can be displaced from the situations or the relationships in which it's occurring. And I have oftentimes seen when there is great sibling conflict that we need to look at what's driving the frustration and Why are these kids so stirred up? What is not working? How do we get them back into relationship? How do we close the separation that is there in order to bring their emotional systems back into balance? So, there's when development's unfolding well, but then there's also when we've really got a problem with frustration because the child's world is so full of separation that we have to try to close the gap there somehow.
Yes, yes. Okay, I want to make sure that we touch on the fabulous topic of your book. And by the way, everyone, if you go on the GPS Community Facebook page, and put your comments on there, you'll be entered into get a draw, that a book, and be entered into a draw to get a copy of this fabulous book. You talk about play, and even though our topic is aggression, it's the whole thing about even the outcome focus that we have as parents that's actually contributing to our kids' aggression even as well. I wanted to just touch base to this extremely important offering of yours about the importance of play. So do you want to say a few things about why it's important to not be so outcome focused, not be so driven in our parenting, especially for those people who have teenagers or preteens and children basically who aren't preschoolers, they're enrolled in more and more things. Although even preschoolers nowadays are enrolled in crazy numbers of things. It's actually really nuts, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. So play was nature's answer to taking care of emotion. Because it's a place that is not for real. There shouldn't be any consequences in play. And it should be a place where expression can come without repercussions to your relationships. You can play fight, you can play at lots of things. You don't have to get it right, or it doesn't have to be real. In teenagers, you'd want to see some creative solitude, journaling, writing, music, running, whatever it is, where it's drawing out their emotional world and giving them some rest so that they can start to make sense of what's stirring them up. What people don't realize is that play is fundamental to development in many different ways. All I'm focusing here is on emotion, because that's play's biggest job. You will see in children's play when they're incredibly frustrated, you will see how they will take things apart, destroy it, and also build it back up again. That is all the play of frustration in terms of changing things, altering things. There's lots you can do here, to draw out emotion into play, which then preserves their relationships in a classroom, relationships at home. I've seen incredible themes in play from kids when they are stuck or very stirred up, going through a divorce, playing out, running a hotel where everybody must come to visit, everybody gets along. The child can orchestrate the relationships in their world in this hotel, very different from the relationships in the real world where it doesn't work so well. And so a child gets to play it out to make sense of it for themselves. And so again, because play is invisible, because the outcomes aren't so self-evident and immediate, we think this is frivolous, unproductive time. But when you trace through history and time, we've always seen that all humans have always played, and mammal species have always played. And if we don't, psychologically, we just don't do well. Maturity takes a hit. We don't come to understand who we are, and our emotional worlds will be incredibly in distress. Play is meant to be an answer to serve the emotional expression that must come out, that we don't have words for, that we don't have awareness for. You don't need it in play. Play expresses emotion all the time. And that's why it's critical. So if a child is really frustrated, I'd say, how do we open up the door to some play that does frustration? I've had families who just play wrestle with parameters so that people aren't getting hurt, and just wrestle it out, and kids will just say, oh, can we wrestle again? I'm feeling really frustrated. And they start to click. And if you can have a parent who's generous enough to say, yeah, I'll wrestle with you, I'd love to wrestle with you. It's about contact and closeness, and a parent taking the lead. Every day I'll be there, 4:00, we'll have our wrestle match. And you just see this rest that it provides for a child. And hopefully after that, some words and some understanding about what is too big, too much, too difficult to bear, that they can't change, but they must have a relationship with. So play is phenomenal. It's a phenomenal, I don't know why we don't use this all the time, because we put so much value
Mm.
on things that we see instead of understanding that nature has all sorts of things here to take care of us. We just got to trust it a lot more.
And play feels great. I mean, that's the crazy thing, is even for us as parents, like, so that positive time that we're spending playing with our child is actually a key part of our parenting as well, right?
It certainly helps to build attachment. The only thing I would say is that make sure when you're playing with your kids, excuse me, that it's something that you enjoy, that brings you. There's some play I could never do with my kids. It just would have driven me crazy to play at some of the things they played at. But I did find areas where we did connect around things and did play together. They need time to play on their own, but make sure that when you play, that it's got the warmth and delight and enjoyment there, because being around someone who's just doing it because they feel they have to, there's nothing there that a child can feed from. It's just, you're a chore then to your parents. So make it full of a delight inside of you when you do.
So I want to briefly touch on that. I debated a couple times whether to go here or not, but special time. Some people advocate, some parenting educators advocate special time and letting the child lead on the play. And that certainly can get you into that place of finding yourself doing something you don't want to do. What do you have to say about that?
Well, play is something that works best when it's more driven from a child, but sometimes adults need to intervene to help draw out some stuff or create the field for things to emerge. You know, like with a frustrated child, taking the lead and getting a wrestling match going, or a dance party. You know, if there's anxiety before going to bed, so we can get stuff moving. I don't have any prescriptions around play. I think what we should do is honor that children need to play, create the environments that are conducive to play, be thoughtful about how it's serving a child, and find our dance with our children in play. There's play that I will do with my kids because it makes sense, and it's about relationship and attachment. And then sometimes they're very clear, Mom, please don't listen. This is our play world, and I can tell that's and no one's getting hurt, and there's parameters around that. Emotionally, they're both safe. And that's a time that I must give them space to tell their stories that only they share and understand. And I would only be an interruption to that. I bring reality into those stories that they don't want that reality. I represent that to them. So I think you have to there's no cut and dry answers here, but to yearn for some insight into what that playtime is doing in terms of serving your child. Is it a time where you're building attachment, with your child, and it's something you're sharing, and it's a time of connection? Is it a time when your child needs space to also move into their world, their play world, and understand who they are? Is it a time when they're playing with their friends or their siblings, where you can see some social type play? Play is very sophisticated. It's not just serving one need, one purpose. It's has many hues. It has many variants to it. And so I think the biggest message I would say is that we need to sit back and value and honor play and the sophistication there that we don't understand. We don't need to, but we do need to work at what we were meant to work at, which is relationship, soft hearts. That's the rest. Nature will take care of the play, create the conditions, and trust in this, rather than always trying to know why, the outcomes. And as long as you see a child, able to get down to the business of play in many different shapes and forms, then just be happy, sit back and delight in the fact that they are in this world and that it's serving them well.
And I think maybe that's a beautiful place to end on, is to just that whole concept when you said sit back and delight. I know you talk about in your book and in various places about how important it is that our children have that one adult at least who is deeply delighted and gives them that message. And do you want to say a couple words about that?
Well, I for myself, I just find human development so incredibly fascinating. And I feel so humble in the face of looking at how a human being grows, things that we don't necessarily understand, but to try to just take that place in a child's life and to you know, sit back and be curious, and to hopefully be full of wonder in the times that you're not frustrated.
Mm.
And to embrace the journey in a vulnerable way, knowing that it will bring lots of emotions inside of you, and that it's a wonderful opportunity for growth. But I just find human development so fascinating. You know, when my friends say, but Deb, this, and this, and I say, but aren't you curious why this happened?
Mhm.
Let's just pause for a moment and think a little bit about this. This is actually a curious situation that we can think through. That's what I find fascinating. I don't know why we're so quick. I know I was a lot quicker when I was a younger parent, but now it's just fascinating to me. So have some wonder. It's a spectacular journey to be able to go on with somebody, to watch them unfold as a human being, and not to know what's around the corner, but to have faith that nature has an intention here for growing our kids up.
Well, and that's the massive gift that you're giving everyone listening, because when you've got a developmental psychologist explaining that, hey, it's okay, they're going to mature properly if you're providing the right conditions, and start focusing on that, you know, that's just so great at helping relax us, because we can wonder when we've got some faith that's going to turn out okay. So thank you very, very much. I want to remind everyone, so go to the GPS community page on Facebook. You can enter to get a copy of this fantastic book from Dr. Deborah MacNamara. And you can go to MacNamara.ca is her website. So it's MacNamara.ca, MacNamara.ca. And of course, we can put that link actually on the Facebook page as well. Thank you so much for taking your time. Oh, and I wanted to say to everyone, because I'm thanking you guys, everyone listening, for taking your time. Please share this too with those who you think could also use to wonder a little bit more and be curious about what's going on with their children's aggression, and not just upset and worried about it. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Jacqueline.
Yeah, absolutely a pleasure.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.